exam.
I'm still not so good at them.
Something like, so you may help. The students see, and then you start to see, you'll find that this is interesting to you. If you go to a company that's only doing one thing, then it's possible.
You could be probably well.
But he's very interested in better his graduates, getting very interesting jobs out of the school. We're very lucky to have him. Because then you get
Actually, you can relax, take it all off. Yeah, we're set.
Okay.
Yeah. School's back.
Sorry, excuse me.
This is screen is better. I have the slides.
Древние ссылки да и у меня какая-то программа есть, которую вести надо.
All right, shall we begin again? I'll make plenty of noise to keep you awake. And I trust we will get you out well before 10 o'clock tonight, because you've had a lot of American law tonight. When we started out last Friday night, I was more asleep than you are now, because I had just flown overnight to Istanbul and then overnight to Almaty, and you came fresh. So we've now had a week here, a very good week, and we thank you for it. And I guess I'll be the last of the United States tax talks. Last Friday night, we started out with a few travelers on the corner of Abai and Doste, and they were going up the mountains. And the mountain was to try to, how the lawyer or accountant for a family with money is a certain kind of lawyers like me. Our goal is to try to increase the family wealth through the generations. But you remember what happened at the end, by the end of my talk last Friday? What situation did we have? I'll give you an answer. We had a rich boy who got to be 21 who got $250,000 that fell out of the sky. We had another rich boy who had to negotiate with his lady love because his parents didn't want to have him lose the money. And then we had family transferring interests in family businesses, mom and dad down to the 3 daughters, just like King Lear. So we had a situation in which my efforts as a wealth planner, and possibly yours as accountants and attorneys in Kazakhstan, because there are many wealthy people in this country, and the people who can pay your accounting firms and legal firms bills are going to have problems like mine. They're not going to have trusts in Kazakhstan, but they might have trusts in Switzerland or Liechtenstein or the Netherlands. I gather that's where people set them up. And so the irony of the situation is that people like me have worked very hard to produce very good tax results, but not very good family results. So we found our clients last Friday night stranded on the top of the mountain with all that money, but not necessarily a sensible result. Now, have any of you had philosophy class and had Hegel? Who's had Hegel? Anyone want to talk about Hegel? I don't want to talk about Hegel very much because it's much too hard for me. I'm just a lawyer. But Hegel's methodology in trying to explain historical method is the dialectical method. You start out with the hard word, thesis, the at this time, and then the antithesis, and then finally the synthesis. And so we had the thesis on Friday night that our job was to try to help tell you about how our clients' family wealth could be increased through the generation. The antithesis is, wow, we did our job, we produced some really great tax results that were really bad for people. And so tonight maybe we try to look at the synthesis of the situation, some rational resolution of the problem of what's going on. So what do we do about resolving the unintended consequences of wealth planning and to avoid the unsatisfactory results of tax planning? Well, so the goal for the family probably should be the long-term best interests of the beneficiary and not just tax savings. Now, you in your country, Kazakhstan, have a very fine estate planning, tax planning lawyer named Abay Kunanbayev. While I was reading the words of Abay sometime last year, I started reading some of the words, and I found that in this book, which I trust many of you have read, there are very practical bits of what we would call in America estate planning advice. Because Abay did a lot of thinking about family wealth. On word 3, I don't know whether I should be reading all of these, but this stuff is available in your materials. I think we sent it around on, is it the L Drive? But basically it talks about parents having made money and passed it down to their children. They find that their children can indulge in a life of idleness. It talks about parents and children who have become successful, but success causes them to commit blunders. Then it says, no one should shun hard work. We talked about the difficulties of rich parents, whether they're in America or Kazakhstan or Switzerland or Russia, taking incentives away from their children. Finally, word 33, which is loaded with information. Let me try to move it around here. I will get it up on the screen. I did a bit of an analysis of what word 33 says, and you will find a slide for this if you want to go back, and then my observations of how word 33 can be harmonized with current thinking about estate planning in the United States. So Abay, who was born in 1845, 104 years before Vincent Tian was born in 1949, he has a lot to teach me about stuff that I can take out to our clients, so that the kind of work that I'm trying to help the clients do for their children and grandchildren actually has a good effect on their children and grandchildren's lives, and with that, I suppose, a healthy relationship with society as a whole. So, again, I'm not going to go through these slides with great detail because the hour is late, but I wanted to show you where they were for their potential usefulness to you. Now, in terms of how Abay's thinking goes, it's really consistent with good current American and probably world thinking about how families of wealth and education and privilege might help train their children. And again, I think you probably are in the position as accountants and future accountants, lawyers and future lawyers, to be asked these questions, because people are making money in this country and the money's got to go somewhere other than into cars and ski houses and things like that, particularly if people want to keep the money over time. We have a very famous Harvard professor named Robert Coles who wrote a study on child psychology, sort of the definitive work, and it's in 7 or 8 volumes, and he spent one volume called Privileged Ones, dealing with what he viewed the problems of children of privilege. And one of the problems they have is the entitlement mentality, that they don't feel an obligation to make their way in the world, but they have a strange sense of both confidence in their wealth, but insecurity that they haven't done anything to make their wealth. And so these thoughts have been rather well documented over time. I have in the materials a more recent piece by Jaffe and Brown called From Entitlement to Stewardship. And you will find that, again, in detail in the materials. And Jaffe and Brown get into the issue of how, in effect, trust planning and trying to protect children after building up their assets through the tax-driven wealth planning that I talked to you last Friday night about, that ironically, tax planning for children, trust planning for children, excuse me, has the effect not really just of protecting the child, but undermining it. That one of the things you really should think of doing, or your client should think of doing for their children and grandchildren, is give them the tools that they need to succeed in life, but also the chance to fail and to learn from the failure, because this is a highly important part of people's development and, in fact, therefore, using a trust fund to protect a child, particularly into adulthood, without a good reason, undermines the well-being of that beneficiary. I will go on. So then we talk about what legal measures can we take to help a child develop, or young adult develop, a sense of competence and stewardship. One of them is to actually, when a child reaches a certain age, and there is going to be a trust, you're trying to get a child used, like the young man who became 21 and the money fell from the sky, have that child set up a trust for himself so that he or she can become a trustee with other family members. In this case, the beneficiary was age 21 or 22 when the money fell through, and put this in trust with an aunt and uncle, for example, until the beneficiary becomes age 30. But during this time, instead of being a passive wealth holder, the child is given the chance, the young adult is given the chance to learn how to invest money with responsible family members. So the idea, the evolving idea is, don't just give a child or young adult money. Give that person some responsibility and a chance to make some mistakes. Back to this. Other techniques. We had Mr. and Mrs. Kaiser transferring interests in the family limited liability company to Johanna, Erica, and Eleanor. Very convenient names. My wife is Johanna, my two daughters are Erica and Eleanor. I had to have names I could remember. You get to be my age, you need all the help you can get. But you put the children in the business. Very good to train your children and your clients to train their children in the business, not just go off to party in the south of France. Put them in real capacities. Sometimes even put them in, some of the best American business people put their children to work in the manufacturing plant, with all the other workers. Not supervisors. Teach them from the ground up. The ancient apprenticeship system. If you have multiple children, if Johanna has different skills from Erica, who has different skills from Eleanor, there are probably ways in the family enterprise that those skills can be used. One child could be the salesperson, the other child could be the accountant, the other child could be the strategic planner. Find out who does what best and get them working together. Then you can find a more natural, organic way to resolve family business succession problems. The Jaffes also suggest having regular family meetings, regular keeping of family records, so that people can track their progress over time. There are some very interesting thoughts, starting about 20 years ago, of incentive trusts. Parents try to make sure that their children don't become wastrels, and so they set money up in trusts and they say, the trustee will pay you $1,000 for every $5,000 that you can make, or $10,000 for every $10,000 you can make. I have some articles in here about incentive trusts, which are popular, and about a third of rich families in the United States with their planners use these trusts in an effort to try to make sure, if you're Bill Gates, you don't want to have Bill Gates and Melinda Gates' kids be lazy. So the idea is give them incentive trusts. At the same time, while these appear to have some allure, Some very good thinkers, a man named Frank from Cornell University, says incentive trusts are actually the wrong way to go about wealth planning because it still involves placing the parents' judgment on the children so that the children can't develop their own capacity to think of what's right and wrong and what's responsible and irresponsible in terms of finances. So there is a pro-thought that, well, let's not have all these lazy rich kids get money automatically from a trust so they can party with it. And so let's give them an incentive to make money. But then there is the con thought that says this is another form of control. It looks like it's trying to be good for the children, but it's still the parent telling the developing younger person what's good. And as time passes, what the parent thinks is what's good is set in stone and possibly is not a very good result for those children. So I have those materials for you there. In conclusion, I would say maybe the best measure is not to give too much. The evolving thought among the rich is that, particularly among very rich people in the United States, is not really to give children a significant amount of your fortune. Does anyone know the name Warren Buffett? Right. Those of you who are finance and accounting students know Buffett is the most successful expert on investments, on picking undervalued stocks, knowing when to hold them. And I have materials here indicating that Buffett does not believe in dynastic wealth. He says that there are outsized rewards to people with talent, and the problem is that those people with talent who won outsized rewards, they pass them on to their children and it ruins their children. So Buffett is well known for saying that it is known as children will not inherit a significant proportion of his wealth. Now, I'm a lawyer. Warren Buffett was worth $50 or $60 billion. Significant portion of $50 or $60 billion? Well, $5 or $6 billion? I don't know. But the fact is Buffett has already pledged to give away most of his money to Bill and Melinda Gates' foundation, I believe, to combine the Buffett charity with the Gates charity. So I think that he is actually spending them down to the point where, as he put it, I want to give my kids just enough so that they would feel they could do anything, but not so much that they would feel like doing nothing. So this again is the evolving thinking, because a great deal of wealth has been produced, particularly during the high-tech period of Silicon Valley and also on Wall Street, even though Wall Street did badly in 2008. It's kind of come back a bit. So this is a way that responsible people are thinking about dealing with their wealth other than just making more wealth. Another thing, charitable foundations and children. I would expect that Bill Gates' children will be very heavily involved in the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We have ways in our country of setting up private foundations for charitable purposes. I don't know whether many have been set up or whether this is done in Kazakhstan, where people make a lot of money and decide they want to sponsor the arts or want to help poor people or want to give money to Kim-Ep University. Kim-Ep University, I judge, is a private university and maybe not eligible for, we have a system of making gifts to charity in the United States where you can reduce your income tax and your estate tax by your gifts to charity. But at least where I live, one thing people do is try to put their children involved in charitable activities. Finally, we've had an interesting change in our tax law in the United States, that the exemptions, which, as I mentioned, were only $400,000 or $500,000 in the late 1980s, rose to $675,000 in 2001, and they are now $5,340,000 per person from our estate tax, our death tax, or for a married couple, $10,680,000. If you don't much care about your local estate tax, which is levied at lower rates than the 40% federal rate, we now have perhaps less incentive for tax purposes driving people to make gifts to their children to lower their estate tax. And what's good about that is that children aren't being given money simply because the parents want to lower the taxes. Maybe there's more room going forward for children to get money later when they're more capable of handling it and when they've had to deal with life alone without their parents' money. So I think unlike the situation where Robert Rich, the man who brought the money into his marital agreement last week, got a lot of money from his father and grandfather to try to lower the father and grandfather's estate taxes, it may be more possible for father and grandfather to keep money later and not be driven so much by estate tax considerations. Despite all the bad things I've said about trusts, there are still some very good uses that make a lot of sense, particularly with adult children in a way to protect them from creditors or bad marriages or physical and mental illness. And I have